Another day, another headline. Pull up a chair, come on in. Different minds around the table. Let's see where the night begins. Questions welcome, ideas welcome. Everybody gets to say. Leave with better questions than the ones you brought today. Community, unity, learning, thinking. Welcome to the following, where good logic has a say. Think a little, laugh a little, grow a little today. Joe is not at all the leader of the following, not at all a cult type of cult. Hey! Type of cult. No Kool-Aid, no spaceships, no squirrel mutilations, no sacrificing goats. Tracksuits not mandatory, just highly recommended. Buy a hat, buy a mug, link in the description. No throwing virgins into volcanoes, no dancing around a bonfire while shucking off clothing in the middle of the forest to the beat of a tom-tom, beat of a tom-tom, beat of a tom. Not at all a cult type of cult. If the stream suddenly goes sideways, Joe boomered again. Community, unity, learning, thinking. Pull up a chair, stay a while. Welcome to the following, where good logic has a say. Think a little, laugh a little, grow a little today. Joe is not at all the leader of the following, not at all a cult type of cult. The following program starts now.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the following program. I am your host, Joe Neeran, aka Good Lawgic. If you were here last night, or if you weren't here, you've been following the news and social media and all the talk about the Lindsay Clancy trial and the divergent opinions about the woman who's accused and has admitted to killing her 3 children, pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. You probably have some sort of idea as to just how uniquely this case has managed to divide opinions, particularly on social media. Yesterday, I was discussing it with my friend Sin, who I had on here co-hosting the show. I also referenced how Runkle of the Bailey, who's an old friend of mine, I consider to be a very learned peer and a very talented YouTube content creator, as well as being a very smart lawyer, that he seemed to be taking a divergent opinion from me, at least on social media. So I asked him, and like the brave warrior he is, he said he would come on in here. And my objective here, just to be clear, as I bring him on in here, Runkle of the Bailey, who's, as I said, is an old friend of the show. He's coming in here as a friend. He's going to leave. I'm going to make sure that when he leaves, he still thinks of me as being a friend. But I happen to enjoy conversations where people are coming at something from at least what seems to be different perspectives, and I know that he's watched a lot more about the case than I have, like a lot more of the trial than I have, and that's why I'm hoping to learn from him, and that we can have a discussion here, and hopefully our audience as well will be able to take away from this conversation and learn more about this Lindsay Clancy case, which I think is something that people have been talking about this trial for many years. So anyway, first and foremost, welcome back to the show, my brother. How are you?
Oh, good to be here. And life is pretty good overall, so I can't complain too much.
Yeah, I haven't had you on here in the last year, at least.
Yeah, it's been a while. So
yeah, no, and Ian and I, we've streamed a lot together over the course of the years. It's hard to think of how many years we've been streaming at this point. We've sort of started out nearly at the same time, but
we were both on for like the Rittenhouse coverage and stuff. So,
and then obviously the Amber Heard trial, and
yeah,
and all of that outgrowth. So yeah, people and the birth and I guess short-lived existence of LawTube. And yeah, anyway, so I mean, Ian is someone I've actually had the privilege of meeting in real life. I met him when we were in California, and he is every bit the scholar and gentleman that you see online. He's exact same way. He's exact same Runkle in person. There's really no difference at all. So, and he's just a great
Likewise.
guy, and I consider him a genuine friend, because once you meet someone and you actually break bread with them or share drinks with them, as we have, you actually can now say, okay, this guy is actually a friend of mine. So Ian is my friend, and I have missed having you on. I haven't had a lot of guests on over the last year or two. I don't have guests very often. I have a co-host who'll join me like on a regular basis, but I haven't had this type of thing very much. And I'm thinking maybe I should do it more. So, in fact, I actually have a goal up tonight. If you want to see me bring in guests, well, in that case, let's try and hit the goal. Tonight's goal is 15 super chats in quantities of $10 or greater. It could be Rumble Rants, could be locals, wherever it is. We get 15 of those, and it's basically, I take it as my audience is signaling to me, we like when you do this. Like when you bring in here people who are other content creators and people who can add to the dialogue. So if that's your deal, I urge you to make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and if you can kick in a few shekels to support the show, that's obviously always appreciated. Anyway, what are you doing with your life these days?
So I bailed on my previous job so that I could take a job. I'm teaching community peace officers now, but this is mostly so that I can, in my spare time, which is like kind of a bit of a joke because, got a full-time job, got a YouTube channel, and then in between. But I just wanted to do law for free, and the previous job wasn't really down with that. So I was like, well, okay, now it's time for me to make a break, and got a good opportunity for something to provide some fallback because, YouTube isn't necessarily super predictable, especially, in the middle of a trade war. Who knows what'll happen with that? So,
and in case you can't tell from the accent and you're unfamiliar with Runkle, he is from north of the border, that hostile territory that we call Canada. So, you live in one of the prairie provinces, right?
Yeah, Alberta, Edmonton, Alberta is sort of where I'm at, and yeah, right. It'll be interesting to see what shakes out. But that's kind of what I've been up to.
Mm-hmm. I think you're the perfect person, seeing as how this is timely and topical, to actually address this here. The real debate: Lake Ontario, Lake America. So,
I mean, I think that's pretty silly. The whole I'm renaming the lake out of spite. It's like, okay, we're getting into petty season, but if you expect a lot from politicians, you're going to be disappointed. And that's true north of the border and south.
Do you call it? Let me ask you this: do you call it Gulf of America or Gulf of Mexico?
Gulf of Mexico.
Okay, no, I'm just wondering. I think it seems juvenile when Trump does that sort of thing. That he's like, I'm renaming this, I'm renaming that, and I think it seems juvenile. But I also think that it's designed to present a certain air of dominance. Like, I think it's purposeful. I don't think it's just a matter of let me rally the troops to all say huzzah. But I think it's actually part of an overall image that he is purposefully trying to present about America being the United States being the dominant force on the planet. So I think that's I think that's why he does it.
If you're not there, it comes off like, trying to present dominance by shooting spitballs at you in class.
Right.
It's like, all right, it's all tiresome to me.
No, I get it. If you're not there, I can understand that you would basically be sitting there chanting like a-hole over and over again. And
well, it's more just like, okay, they're doing what now? Whatever.
Fair enough. So you're doing pro bono work? What type of pro bono work are you doing?
Criminal defense, firearm, and I've actually taken on some landlord-tenant because, believe it or not, there are landlords who are complete a-holes. And tenants never have any money to do anything about it because, they just don't, right? So So there's a lot of landlords that just pull all sorts of stuff. So I've taken on a few of those files where it's just like, all right, you are very blatantly violating the law. Let's let's kind of ruin your day.
So you basically become like the lawyer version of Samuel L. Jackson at the end of Pulp Fiction. Like you're walking the earth doing good works.
Pretty much. That's where I'm trying to be anyway. And I mean, you got to have funding, so YouTube and teaching. But other than that, it's just like let's help some people. And I see somebody saying, I see my tad elbows up. Don't get me wrong, I don't like Carney in the slightest. I just one day I'll meet a politician I like, and
do you like
Polivier?
Do you like Polivier?
Better than Carney, but that doesn't mean I really like him. It's like I much prefer his stance on firearms. So
right. Well, anyway, you've been following the Lindsay Clancy trial, right?
Yeah, I've been doing recaps and watching, every minute of what is becoming a bit of a circus at this point.
So let me ask you this. Can you break down, based on the evidence, when you cover a trial, let me start with this. When you cover a trial, do you like to go into it relatively raw? Do you try researching as much as possible? Like, what is because I think different lawyers, when they're covering trials, have very different approaches. I think some of them just want to be like, okay, I know every fact that's out there in the public domain about, the background of this case and what she said and this thing. And I'm curious to see what parts the prosecution or the plaintiff puts forward and which parts the defense puts forward. And this way I can provide background on that. And then there are others who are like, no, I don't really want to know that much. I want to know, overall skeleton of what the body of the case is about. But after that, I want to sit there almost like a juror, a lawyer in the jury box, digesting what's coming in and not have the other stuff filtering in. So I'm wondering which of those two approaches, or if there's a third approach that you use.
Usually I sort of try to go more blind. And this one, I wasn't really planning on covering it, except I had a lot of my followers going, you have to cover this one. And I was like, all right, let's see, if it interests me. And it does, because it's kind of an interesting, thing on sort of legal topics. But it's the other problem is if you go in knowing everything, then you go in and you're just like, you end up knowing things that are not true, at least from the perspective of the jury.
Right.
Because it's like, all right, I know there's this critical piece of evidence, and then they try to get it in, and the judge goes, yeah, that's not coming in. And so at that point, you've got this discrepancy between, what
your brain is holding, what the jury actually knows.
Yeah. So if you come in, like, the jury never watches any of the pretrial hearings. They never, any of that. So, and it can be dangerous, right? You can form an opinion that the jury doesn't end up forming.
Right.
Even just the order in which you hear information can matter. Like, so yeah. And the other problem is, depending on where you're getting your information from early, that information can be unhelpful. Like, if you look at the Depp trial, there was a whole lot of information that was, out in the public from the media, and almost all of it was unhelpful because the media was Amber Heard's PR team.
Yeah.
And if you went into Rittenhouse listening to the media, you probably had the idea that, he crossed state lines with the gun, which didn't end up being the case.
Killed 3 black people.
Yeah, which also didn't end up being the case. And, I still see people who sort of heard the media account of it, who will tell me, if he'd shot white guys, it would have been a different verdict. And I'm like, oh, you should do the barest of research here, right? Like, just the beginnings of research.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you prefer, I happen to, that's my general approach also. The only exception, I would say, with respect to when I'm handling a trial that just seems like it's really too rich in fact for me to actually Like there's just too many side things to like catch up, like the Alex Murdoch trial, right? I felt like trying to walk into that blind, you would just be overwhelmed by like with confusion. And I'm sitting here. My role as an attorney watching is to help clarify things for my audience, who I assume most of them are walking in blind. So there, I feel as if you really need it. And I'm wondering, like over here, this feels like I'm not sure how this one would qualify, with respect to understanding, you're understanding the case. I think you said you did more research here before you started than most trials.
This one, I looked at things a little bit to sort of get an idea of what it was about. But for the most part, I just, sort of went in blind and was seeing what was going on with that. And I mean, because this one is really going to come down to a lot of jury impressions about, what their take is on. I mean, it's kind of a sympathetic versus unsympathetic situation, if that makes sense, because the facts of the actual incident are incredibly unsympathetic, right? It's woman has killed her 3 kids, and there's no dispute about that, other than like some TikTok weirdos. And there are TikTok weirdos out there with theories like, Patrick Clancy did it. And I have tried my best to like look at that and be like, okay, let's see how this goes. And I watched some of those TikTok videos and I was like, okay, does this make any sense? And the conclusion I came to is no, they are absolutely weirdos. They don't know what they're talking about. But so it's more blind. But it's been a really interesting trial. It's I mean, a lot of it comes down to psych evidence, but it also comes down to some interesting facts and interesting manipulations, which yeah.
All right. So I would appreciate, since I'm positive, factually 100 times whatever I know about this case. So I'm wondering if you can spend 5 minutes just walking me through what you believe the prosecution did. I assume most of the facts, seeing as how there's an admission that she killed them coming from the defense, I assume there are probably very few facts that are in dispute about what actually happened. It's more a matter of finding whether or not she was actually, she was legally insane at the time of the murder. So, is that presumption correct?
Yeah. I mean, basically, this is a weird trial because both the defense and the prosecution agree that she should probably never get out, because that's kind of where the defense position lands you as well. But the defense position has it that she probably dies in a mental hospital versus dying in a prison, right? So I see some people online who are like, they just want her to get out, and and it's like, no, she's not getting out. Or if she does, it'll be at least 20 years, right? Like optimistically 20 years. But the questions that sort of come up in terms of the facts are some interesting ones. There's a issue of the expert had this theory about, well, she crushed up these pills and that shows that she's got volition, which I thought was a stupid assertion in any event, because crushing up pills does not take a whole lot of effort. He described it as a laborious process if you don't have a mortar and pestle. So I put out a short mocking that, because you can do it with an onion, and I did it with, well,
let's slow down. Let's slow down. Okay?
Yeah.
Let's go back and let's start with this. Okay. Maybe you can give us some background about the family and the situation before the day of the murder, then bring us into the day. I'm looking to you, frankly, to give me an unbiased breakdown as to what the facts of this particular case are, certainly to the extent that they're agreed upon between the prosecution and defense, and fill me in. Because like I said, I came to this case this week. Like I didn't know anything about it. I just started looking at it a little bit, and I started doing some quick research and trying to put together. And I saw the NGRI defense, and then I saw reactions that people were having to all of this, and I formed certain opinions which I expressed pretty strongly about the people who are supporting Lindsay Clancy. And I think perhaps you may have misunderstood where I was coming from with that. I wasn't trying to direct what the verdict should be. I don't care what the verdict here is. I mean, I hope whatever verdict they come to is the correct verdict. I feel no vested interest in whether or not she's found not guilty by reason of insanity or she's convicted. But I do feel, my point was, I was saying that those people who are coming out saying, I support Lindsay, I think are making a terrible mistake as to what messaging you are presenting to a potential mate. You have to sort of take for a moment and put yourself in the shoes of someone who is thinking about making you the caretaker of their child, the most precious thing on earth to them, and saying, I'm going to put this woman in charge of my offspring, my future, my legacy is going to be entrusted to her. And she basically is expressing to me a thought that she can see circumstances where the caretaker might go off the rails and destroy that very thing she's supposed to take care of, and
I don't think
she
that's
should
what
be
people
excused.
are really about.
Okay.
I think that when people are saying they support her, nobody supports what she did. It's not like, I get. It's that what you see is that there's this big pathway of essentially the system that she was relying on to help her failed her. And so, she looked online for a postpartum depression specialist. And what she found was a person who advertised that they were big into postpartum depression and had been at it for a year. And so they're and then they end up putting her on drugs. They put her on different drugs, and she basically completely destabilizes on this combination of drugs. Okay. And so I think it's more people empathizing. Oh, yeah.
Right. If we could just time out for 1 second, and this is my fault. I screwed up. I shouldn't have gone down the road of introducing where we had our divergence, okay? Because really, I want to just get background on the case. And I really want to, in this way, we'll have a lot of different questions which I'll have for you about what happened here in the background. We'll all be, we'll be on the same page as far as that. And, during the second half of our conversation, we can get into the societal perspectives about this case. But first, let me ask you. I
want to make clear, I'm also not talking about the Twitter nutters and so forth, or TikTok nutters.
I think that was clear.
Because any of the people who are out there saying, "Oh, she's factually innocent," are ridiculous, and anybody who's what she did is okay is ridiculous. And it's just not worth talking about those people because they're. And
I'm not lumping you with them. I would never lump you with them. I understand that. And I never thought for a second you were you were from that.
No, there are some people in the chat where I'm just look, I'm not talking about the TikTok people, because there are TikTok weirdos idiots on that, but it's not even worth giving them any any oxygen. Air in this.
Right. I agree with you on that. And Branka here is asking a great question, but I want to first, before we get to his question, I want you to just break down for me. Let's say from, they say it's postpartum depression. So if you can give me a breakdown as far as you understand it, from basically when did she last give birth? I mean, I don't even know the date of the murders. Do you know the date that it happened?
Oh, I can't remember the date. That wasn't
roughly month and year. Do you know month and year that happened?
I'd have to look that up. Actually, right. It's not.
I think it was 2023 or something. I think it was in 2023, right?
23 or 22, somewhere in there.
It was a few years. It was a few years back. So 8 months earlier, she gave birth to a baby, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so one of the stronger points for the prosecution, which the prosecution has not done the best job of actually holding up to, is that that is normally something that would be outside of the range for postpartum depression and psychosis. However,
what do you mean outside the range? What do you mean by that?
So the DSM puts a 4-month cap on it, but there's other sort of guides that go as far as a year. So, the problem with the prosecution is that their experts weren't really very well able to deal with that discrepancy. So that
you're saying they haven't hit hard. you're saying they haven't hit hard enough about the fact that postpartum should not be. If she gave birth in April of 2022, and Branka's telling us that the murder was on January 24th, that she should have been done with any postpartum by August, September, the latest. And no way should he be dealing with postpartum in January of 2020.
According to the DSM, but there are other sort of guidebooks and other, sort of standards for it. The problem that they have is that they really need somebody to say why they're picking the DSM over the others, and they struggled with that. So that's an area that the prosecution could have done more on and didn't. And Branka also quite properly identified one of the other weaknesses, of the defense case, which is that the psychosis aspect, the main psychosis symptom is this, described command hallucination, which basically comes up on the day of and then ends on the day of. And so the issue is, well, did it really? That's the prosecution's position. And
Right.
Now that doesn't exclude things, but that is something the prosecution really should be doing a better job of hammering at. Instead, with the prosecution's had a real hard time finding their voice, and they came up with a better theory at the end in closing. Their closing was much better than but they had to walk away from their opening, because their opening started off with, she didn't want to be a mom anymore, so that's why she killed them. And then they had to come back with something else for their close, which is not a great place to be when you have to change your mind on that.
That's I would call that a litigation fail. The idea to your opening is you should be basically laying out the outline as to where you plan on bringing witnesses and evidence to support this opening, and it's considered a litigation fail by most advocacy experts if either side fails to do that. That in closing, the other side should be hammering you. They promised you they were going to give you this, or they promised you they were going to, spell this out for you, and you haven't seen any evidence to support that, because they were just, making that up, or they're just not. It's not true. So,
and in a really bad moment for the, for the prosecution, the defense took their star expert and fed them the prosecution's opening. Like a key portion of the prosecution's opening, the description of things, and their expert would not stand by it. He's like, well, that's really, he's like, that was really minimizing what you went through. And when the prosecution's own expert is struggling with that, that is not a good place to be.
Getting skewered on cross, you're saying?
Yeah, well, and basically was invited to skewer the prosecutors on cross.
So I just want to get factually though, because we're getting. I was hoping that we could do this.
Better prosecutors could have won this a lot. Could have had a much better case.
Perhaps. I certainly wouldn't dispute that. You, like I said, you've watched a lot more than I have, and I'm going to defer to your expertise with respect to your assessment as to how they handled the evidence that they had. But I just want to get factually here, okay? So from what I understand, this is the third child that she had, was in or around April 2022. At the time, her husband, this is obviously Lindsay Clancy, her husband is Patrick Clancy. They have 3 children, and she's dealing with postpartum depression for months afterwards. And I've heard a lot about what happened during those intervening months. A lot of the people who are expressing sympathy for Lindsay, they're like, you don't understand the cocktail of different medications that she was given, and how she kept crying out for help and no one was willing to help her, and that I'm not sufficiently sympathetic to the plight that she was suffering through, or how cold and insensitive Patrick was. So I just was hoping you can give me a background, what you feel was going on during that 8-month period from when the child was born until it was a girl, right? The last one. Until she was.
I'm trying to remember the order.
But until
I'm remembering the key details, and that isn't one of them. So
okay, so I'm not. It's not a test. I'm not looking to gotcha here. But I was really I'm looking to just elicit information like through conversation. So,
Yeah, I just in
but my
terms
question
of-
is, how would you lay out her developing struggles and the husband's role with respect to trying to ameliorate or failing to try to ameliorate those struggles, and how this built up from the Lindsay sympathizers' perspectives to the ultimate denouement, the horrible denouement that we saw.
Well, if you get into the TikTok weirdos want to say that he was cold and uncaring and whatever else. And I don't think that's really what came out at trial. What came out at trial was basically that he was overwhelmed and not really what, he's not a psychiatrist. He's not a psychologist. He's trying to do his best, for his wife, who's experiencing some pretty serious symptoms, but he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just trying his best, right? And so trying his best there means like, okay, we're going to try to get you to see some people. We're going to, hire a maid for a bit. We're going to, these kinds of things.
Right. So they hired a nanny at first. And then I understand at a certain point, he moved his work back into the home so he could be around her that much more.
Yes. He was in the basement there working, from the basement.
And do you know what he did? Oh, do you remember what he did for a living? Like that he's able to just shift like that? I'm just wondering. I'm just trying to get an overall picture of the family.
I'm trying to remember what it is he does. But at any rate, he was just, working.
Okay, so it's not relevant. He's working from home, and she's going to see these different psychiatrists.
Oh, he's Microsoft. That's.
Oh yeah. Okay, fine. So he's working from home. Do you know how long he was working from home before January 24th? Before the date, like when did that shift happen that he starts working from the house?
It was a bit before, but he was at the house at the sort of key time, and he was trying to provide, whatever support he could.
I'm saying, was it a week before? Was it months before? Do you know? I'm not testing.
No, I'm just like, oh god.
I'm just trying to get an overall feel for like the background as to what happened here, because I didn't watch the trial, so I'm just trying, and I'm hearing all these different stories from the Lindsay sympathizers who think I'm cruel and unusual for the positions I've taken, and I really just want to know what happened. So that's
and I mean, I don't think it's worth getting into like the weeds on that, because that's sort of where I don't think the timing of like how long he was there was sort of the critical aspect, because him being home, the only thing that ended up really changing was that she needed him out of the house and so depending on the prosecution, like the prosecution's theory is that she had a calculating plan to get him out of the house. Right. The defense theory is basically that, he was going about an ordinary day, and then ends up, she has this command hallucination. And I mean, if I was the prosecution, I'd be focusing on exactly what Bronca said, which is basically this command hallucination happens once and then like never again.
Right.
Right. And so,
but even the way it happened,
just kind of been all over.
From the clips I've seen, even the way it happened was a very unusual thing, where it was a constant talking voice, where usually if someone hears a voice and they're actually really, being controlled by some sort of psychotic voice, it'll be like just like a message here, a message there, not like one chirping in their ear that never came before and all of a sudden just starts chirping at them for a half hour straight. That's I remember seeing a clip of an expert, a rebuttal expert, who made that claim, and that it was a very unusual type of psychosis that she's claiming to have had. But before I get to that, do you have any idea how many therapists she saw, roughly? 2 therapists, 5 therapists, 10 therapists before the day in question?
2 nurse practitioners, multiple psychiatrists, and like every person she saw, she ends up with medication changes. And so they keep trying medications. Some of them don't sit well with her. Some of the medications she gets suggested she doesn't take because she, it was sort of presented like this was an issue of, vanity, that she doesn't want to take one of them that has a side effect of a rash. But the side effect of a rash is actually a really serious rash. It's like your skin basically dies. So she might have had reasons not to want that one. But basically, she's on medications. They're spinning her off one medication onto the next medication, and it's not working out. So, and I find it's kind of interesting because when you look on Twitter, there's a lot of people online who, for instance, will say, like, around school, I don't want to use, words that'll get you into trouble with YouTube, but like,
Right. Self-delete, you mean?
incidents we'll go with. And they'll say SSRIs are the cause, right? And they'll say, like, look, this person was on all these SSRIs.
SSRI is an abbreviation for
selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and basically when your body sends out these neurotransmitters into the synapses, it gets picked up again. So the then the inhibitor basically prevents it from getting picked up, which means that it stays there longer. So basically you get more effect out of the serotonin that you have.
And that's part of the so SSRI are the nature of medications that she was taking to try and treat her
some of them. She was issues. She was briefly on a variety of different medications.
Okay.
And
had she ever told anyone that she was having thoughts of causing harm or harming herself before the day in question?
She told people she was having suicidal ideation, but she denied having a plan.
What is ideation?
So ideation, as opposed to like having a plan, is somebody thinking, things like, it would be better if I, unalived, versus somebody who's like, I'm going to do this Tuesday with, right. in the study with the candlestick kind of thing. Right.
And at this point, for purposes of YouTube, I should remind you all that if any one of you are dealing with any sort of mental health issues and thinking about causing harm to yourself or others, we urge you please to make sure that you get the professional medical help and attention, and address that as quickly as possible, because it's horrible how many people are dealing with genuine mental struggles, and the only way to deal with it is try and get some serious help from professionals. And neither Runkle nor myself are mental health professionals, and we certainly don't want to see anyone harm themselves or others. So
I'm not even a mental health amateur, so
it's insane. So I struggle with my own mental health, just trying to make sure that I don't boomer the show. That's like basically my biggest issue, mental health wise. But I wanted to get your so as far as so she had told people that she's thinking of harming herself.
Yeah. Now, one of the things is that she had some incentive to present herself as better than she may have been to other people, because of course she's a nurse. She knows what happens if she sort of says, hey, I'm having thoughts of harming, the children, which is basically they take the kids and she loses the ability to be a nurse, and they blow up her entire life. So I see this as well with like gun owners who, might be having mental health problems, but they don't want to tell anybody because they know that if they do, they're going to lose.
Consequences are too consequential for their liking. So she had ideations in both directions, both of harming herself and of harming her own children.
That is what seems to have come out after the fact.
And she never told anyone as far as the defense has brought forward, she never told anyone that she had thoughts of harming her children.
She mentioned that she had some thoughts, but only to like a few select people, and very sort of non-specifically. So not in a way that would have gotten anybody to do anything is kind of the bottom line on that.
Because when I'm trying to assess culpability here, I keep coming back to something, frankly, I learned all the way back in law school, which is, that if a person sets himself up to be in a position to do harm under an imbalanced state, like, for example, right, someone is planning to commit a terrible crime. They're planning on, let's say, committing murder, and they don't feel that they have the stomach for it. So they basically drink and drink and drink and drink in order to build up their courage. Like, let's find out liquid courage. And by the time they actually do the deed, they're actually not in the right frame of mind. We will not look at that self-intoxication as if like, well, he couldn't form mens rea because he was so drunk. It's like, no. That was part of, we're going to look at the entire picture here and basically look at it as if the murder starts happening beforehand. And in a similar vein, I think that her refusal to get help or to take steps to protect her children from herself, I think, to me, that I find that very troubling to say that she should not be held to account for that. Do you see what I'm saying?
The thing is that's not in the law, right? Because in the law, if she, completely told every psychologist to go F themselves and sought no treatment whatsoever, the question is still, what was her mental state at the time? And
no, I understand.
Yeah.
I agree with you about the law. I agree with you about the law, and that is a distinction from what I was talking about, legal principle there, and you were right to make that correction. You're correct about the law. I was really talking from a morality, philosophical, like what is right, what is wrong type of thing. To me,
people can absolutely think the law sucks on this one, and
and I do. I think it's outrageous that when you're the same way we would hold someone in a business setting to a reasonable financial duty levels, and having levels of care to look out for people for money that belongs to others, that is in their charge. I would think as a bare minimum that we would look at a similar standard, that there's certain standards of care with respect to how someone takes care of their own children. And a failure to meet that standard, I would think should create culpability of a very serious nature. And failure to have laws to that effect means we can't convict Lindsay of that. But that's actually more of a social question as to the nature of our laws than anything else. So I'm not disagreeing with you about the law, but I am telling you that as a human being, it sort of makes me feel a level of outrage and frustration. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, part of this is sort of the law comes about this from a sort of sense of, moral responsibility, and the idea being that somebody doesn't have moral responsibility if they were not, in their head to a degree that is kind of extreme, right? It does have to be a pretty extreme degree. Like, it's got to be that you either are so compelled that you can't control your actions at all. And so you'll see this sometimes for things like automatism, where somebody,
What is that?
So automatism is basically like you're acting like a robot. And one of the most common situations for automatism is certain medications can have that as a side effect. So like sleepwalking, as an example, right? You'll get situations of, sleepwalking, and certain medications, for instance, can have as a side effect that you sleepwalk and can engage in fairly complicated behaviors. There was a case in Canada where a guy who was sleepwalking got into a car and then, was driving down the road and woke up and had no sort of sense of it, but had been in several car accidents along the way. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured, but, he bumped off a few vehicles. But he was able to operate a motor vehicle while he was, in that state of automatism, which, is kind of frightening, right?
And I'm sorry.
It's sort of related to how you can like drive to work and then you get to work and you forget how you got there.
Right. You forget which route you took or anything about the drive itself.
But it's a much more extreme sort of element of it. But it's like how your brain can go haywire sometimes.
Okay. So my question for you is, let's get to the date of the murder, okay? And the steps that she did take in order to get this thing done, as far as best we, the public, understand them to be. So she had, before this, from what I understand, she had been Googling various questions, like about how long it would take to strangle 3 kids, and how long the trip is for him to go. Where did she send him out to? She sent him out to CVS?
It was that she was Googling how long it took to get to this one restaurant, which is the 3V. And, I'm sure 3V does not appreciate the publicity on this one, but but also questions.
Maybe we'll bump into Patrick Clancy at the 3V. So,
well, and it's so it's 6 miles, and then there was also a CVS that she sent him to get some children's laxative that was 2 miles away. So the prosecution theory on that is that she's sending him out basically to make sure he's out of the picture so that she's got time to commit the killings, and then at that point is and that she's Googling this specifically to be like, I need to know how far this is. The defense sort of perspective on that is, well, the place, and unfortunately they didn't call evidence as to the place that they normally would have gone to being closed, but she's like, they've been to this restaurant before, they haven't gotten takeout from that restaurant before, but it is right next to the CVS where she if you think about it, if you assume that she's guilty, as a sort of prima facie place, your starting point is going to be your starting point on that is going to be, well, she was sending him away so she's got time to commit the killings. If you assume that she's innocent, your starting point on that is going to be, well, she needed this this laxative, and so she probably sent him to a place that's near the laxative so that she could get him to pick up both.
Okay.
It's
well, okay, so now I need to know a little bit more about the facts here, okay? So do you know around first and foremost, around what time of night was it that she sent him out? Do you know?
I don't know the time.
Well, how long a trip was she sending him out for?
I mean, it's not a whole long distance, like 6 miles in a car. What's that like? Now I'm trying to do the calculation to kilometers
10, 15
in my
minutes,
head.
10, 15 minutes each way.
Yeah. So, it's not a huge amount of time that she's sending him out. And I mean, the thought that I have when I look at that is that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense as a stalling tactic. One of the other things the prosecution hinged a lot of their case on was that she calls the pharmacy to confirm that they've got the laxative, like that they've got it in stock. And I'm thinking, okay, the prosecution's theory is, well, she wants him to be there for longer. And I'm going, wouldn't he be there for longer if they didn't have it in stock? Because if they didn't have it in stock, then she could be like, oh, you got to go to another pharmacy, like it's going to take you longer or whatever else, right?
It was prescription. It was prescription, or it was over the counter?
No, it's just off the shelf.
Okay, so she sends him out to the 3Vs to get food, and then to the CVS, which is right next door, to get the children's laxative, right?
Yeah.
Now, how long roughly before that had she Googled the timing on all of this? Was it a day earlier? Was it like 20 minutes earlier? Like how?
It was basically right before. She's pulling up like the restaurant and the distance to the restaurant, but she's pulling this up in Apple Maps, right? So, I mean, I think of like when I'm looking for a restaurant, I often will pull up Google Maps and just put in like, okay, this restaurant, like if I was sending my wife to go pick up, takeout on the way home, I might well pull it up in a mapping program to be just like, how much of a pain in the ass am I asking her to do? I really think this one kind of goes either way. And frankly, I think that this is one of these facts that's kind of a weather vane fact. And so what I mean by that is that if you think she's guilty, you're going to assume that you're going to interpret this fact as bad. If you assume she's not guilty, you're going to interpret this fact as, not meaning anything. And if you're on the fence, I don't think this is going to be the thing that sways you one way or the other.
Which fact?
The looking up the directions and so forth. It's one of those things that either is innocent or not, but to interpret it, it has a stronger effect of being interpreted backwards than it does of being interpreted forwards, if that makes any sense.
All right. Well, because when I first heard that she had looked it up, I was like, that sounds terrible. That sounds as if she's planning to go into a fugue state. Is her claim, and I'm going to call this psychotic episode, looking at it in a light most favorable to her. Okay, so we'll call it a psychotic episode that she was in what I would call a fugue state, right? I mean, I think that's a fair. Would you agree that's a fair term to say it's a fugue state?
I mean, it's not really what she's arguing. She's arguing that she was basically subject to a command hallucination.
Okay,
right?
So that's fine. We'll work with that
yeah.
term then. Let's work with the appropriate term. So, is she saying the command hallucination started after Patrick leaves, or is it before he leaves, and that's why she's Googling?
She says that it happens after he's gone, right? That it's just so basically it's while Patrick's out of the house, she gets this command hallucination, and then immediately acts on it, and that's the sort of beginning and end of it.
So to me, and I don't know why you would think that that's not a significant thing. Why would someone be Googling how long this whole thing is going to take? And she also Googled how long it would take for her kids to be strangled. Was I mistaken about that? Because I thought I saw that somewhere.
I haven't seen that. So
if that is true,
really missed that.
That would be a significant fact, right?
That would be, but I like when you said that, I was like, did I miss something really, massive on that? I'm
going to ask A on this because I don't want to misspeak on the facts.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything like that online either. So I don't think that is actually a thing that happened.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm glad to have it corrected. I'm asking Claude right now.
And I mean, if she had, my opinion of where the jury's going to land, my percentages on that swing dramatically, but I can't see anything. I don't remember anything like that. That's news to me.
All right. Well, I'm asking Claude right now from if he can. Did Lindsay Google how long it would take to strangle her kids? And but sometimes Claude can take a minute. So I wouldn't hold my breath.
Claude can make stuff up sometimes.
I'm going to check for this. I'm going to look for the sources once they come to that. But I don't just trust AI because I agree with you that they just want to give you whatever they think they. But what they're saying here is from what. So maybe perhaps I was mistaken. What Claude is actually saying, I'll share the screen with you here.
Oh, that's very tiny.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to have to make this bigger. Make us smaller. Perhaps that'll make us pop a little bit more. All right. So, from what's coming out of testifiers so far, no investigators haven't presented evidence of a search specifically about strangling their kids. Massachusetts State Police Detective Timothy Schiappini testified he didn't find searches like that in the forensic phone analysis. What came up in testimony were methods of self-harm. Wikipedia was reached via a link about musician Taylor Hawkins. Defense attorney Kevin Reddington references search for how to slit your throat to die in terms like schizophrenia, psychosis during cross-examination, but the detective said he didn't recall locating those specific searches. He did confirm finding searches related to medications and hallucinations from January 2023, the day before the children died. So, so she was looking up hallucinations. Okay, but that is very different. I'm glad we dug a little further, so I was able to we could correct that. She did not Google how long it would take them to die, because when I heard that, I was like, oh my God, how can anyone think that this was an actual psychosis? So, so you're saying your position is, let me ask you this: if you were sitting on the jury right now, based on what you've seen, would you vote not guilty by reason of insanity?
I think that's where the evidence is.
Okay.
And I think that's largely because, quite frankly, the prosecution ran a very poor case.
Let's get into that a little bit more. Why do you think they ran a poor case?
Their theory at the their opening statements and their theory at the closing statements are completely different. They're and the conservative.
Let's start with that. Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Distinguish. Well, how is it different from the opening to the close?
So the opening statement is basically she was tired of being a mom. She didn't like being a mom, so she planned this killing, and she was faking her mental illness, and the suicide attempt was a fake suicide attempt. So that's kind of the that's their.
So
opening.
Jumping out the window was a fake suicide attempt.
They very strongly hint that in the opening. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And that did land her in a wheelchair, right? She ended up becoming crippled as a result.
Yes. Yeah.
So did she dive down? She dived down head first? Or feet first?
They argued feet first, but the evidence really suggested head first.
Okay.
So they end up walking away from that opening statement because, amongst other things, they end up with one of their witnesses, who they say, like, what do you think of this opening statement? They tell them the opening statement. The guy's like, yeah, that's really minimizing what you went through. And he's clearly uncomfortable with it.
Right.
So, like, that was very detrimental. So on close, they have a new theory. And the theory is, yes, she was mentally ill. Yes, it was a real attempt. But that she needed to get rid of the kids because they were her protective factor, which isn't really a thing in psych, but okay.
He needs to get rid of the kids because he's there.
Because the kids are keeping her from, unaliving herself. So, the theory about, like, she didn't like the kids, she didn't like being a mom, was contradicted by basically every one of the prosecution's own witnesses, because they're all like, no, she's an amazing mom. That's the prosecution's witnesses, which is kind of a weird place to be.
Right.
So, the prosecution's theory, wandering, is a problem. And a lot of the prosecution's experts didn't hold up well on cross. I thought the guy who should have been their best witness kind of fell apart.
Right. Well, I want to come to that in just a moment. I just want to point this out. I happen to be amazing at lawyering. I just hate doing it, though. So I don't really know that that's actually like a contradiction that she could.
No,
someone could be amazing as a mother and still like hate doing it. Like just really
the problem with that is that everybody, like, all of the testimony was that she loved being a mom, and it was really, her favorite thing ever, and that.
So that's more of a direct refutation. Okay. So you were talking about
the anxiety that she was experiencing wasn't about, like, oh no, I've got these kids. She was much more anxious about, like, possibly having to go back to work and not being around the kids. So, it was very odd because as a trial for something like this, because, like, the ex-husband seemed to be very much on her side. The mother-in-law from the father's side seemed to be very much on her side. A lot of the experts, and this is including the prosecution experts, were extolling how much she liked being a mom, how good of a mother she was prior to the killings. So that was all very odd. And the prosecution kind of got a lot of that evidence out themselves, which was in some ways an own goal.
No, it seems not just in some ways. It seems like completely like an own goal, unless like you're trying to like get in front of it. But that seems like a strange thing. What do you make about this issue that everyone? I think that the testimony came out that he called at 5:33. He left at 5:09. Calls 25 minutes later. She's already killed at least one of the kids at this point, and that she basically makes as if everything is normal. Do you take anything? Does that influence you at all as a potential juror in this case?
So the defense and the prosecution have a different timeline theory on that, because the defense theory seems to be that she started after that call, whereas the prosecution's theory is that she was like halfway through. Now, the prosecution's theory is kind of they've got a different theory as to the actual like how things happen, and the prosecution theory kind of relies on misstating some of the evidence, because one of the issues is in terms of how these exercise bands were around people's around the kids' necks, because she says, oh, they weren't tied, but Patrick Clancy describes like having to untie it and like a shoelace without a bow. So, just kind of a one, something like that, right? And the thing is with shoelace, that won't do much. That won't apply continuous pressure. But these are exercise bands. They're
Rubber.
They're stretchy. They're rubber. And so if you ever go, if you ever have blood drawn for a blood test, you'll run into a nurse who will put a little tourniquet on your arm, right? To block the return of the blood flow, so that your veins puff up and blood can be drawn easily.
Right.
And that's done with a stretchy material, and they just take it, they wrap it around, and they just put a twist in it, right? And that in and of itself is enough to apply that continuous pressure, and it stays on.
It's got a circulation.
If you do this with a sort of, but she does this demo midway through the trial where she just like loops it repeatedly without putting that, the twist in it, the like half knot, and without it being around anything. So she just loops it in air and it falls apart, and it's like, see? And I'm like, well, that doesn't...
That's terrible demonstration.
Yeah, and so if the jury was on board, they're like, oh boy, look, that's the smoking gun. If the jury wasn't on board at that point...
Why would that be the smoking gun? Everyone knows that there's no dispute that she strangled her kids. Why would that be a smoking gun, so to speak?
Well, the reason why that's the critical element there is because the prosecution's theory is that there's evidence that it basically takes about 10 seconds for unconsciousness, right? But unconsciousness isn't brain death. The brain death takes like 2 minutes after that. And so the defense theory is basically she ties the exercise band around, the kid is unconscious, and then she can just leave it, right? And then the fact that it is a elastic material will continue pulling and will result in death. Whereas the prosecution's theory is that she has to wrap it around the kid's neck, hold it until until the kid's unconscious, and then keep holding it for 2 minutes. And that's a much more like egregious kind of activity, right? That is, but also it stretches the timeline up.
It's more ruthless. It's more ruthlessness.
It certainly feels more ruthless, but it also extends the timeline, because if it's just unconsciousness, right? You put it on, you wait until it's unconscious, until there's unconsciousness, set in, for the kid, and then you can sort of set the kid down and then move on to the next kid. That means you've got a timeline that basically extends to perhaps under a minute for all three of them, right?
Well, she's just making them all unconscious.
Yeah, and somebody says
she's a registered nurse, though, isn't she?
And somebody says, I can hold my breath for 10 seconds. This is not at all about breath. This is an important distinction. They're not being choked. They're not being air choked.
They're not having blood flow.
Blood flow. Right. And specifically what happens is it's low amounts of pressure, which are not enough to compress the carotid arteries, but they do compress the veins. And because the veins get backed up, it can't clear the blood. So basically no blood flow happens at that point, right. And unconsciousness.
It's not a matter of respiration. It's a matter of circulation.
Yeah. So for the MMA people out there, like the difference between a breath choke and a blood choke, when you see somebody who's blood choked, they go out very quickly. And
she's a registered nurse, though, right?
Yes.
So she would understand the difference between unconscious and dead.
Yeah. And so the question is basically, was she sitting there holding this band for each child for a lengthy period and then moving on to the next one? Or was it tied, wait for the child to go unconscious, tie the next one? And
Was it
the
multiple bands or
evidence-
one band?
Multiple bands, one band per child.
So in that case, it would seem to be, you would think that she tied it around them and left it there, right?
That seems to be the most likely conclusion.
Otherwise, you would just use the same band over and over again, right?
You'd think. And also, when Patrick Clancy came down there, he said that he had to untie the band to remove it, because he says he removed the band from the kids' necks,
right.
and that it required him to untie it. And he described it as basically like a shoelace knot, but without the bow. So, basically a granny knot.
Right.
And so this is key to the prosecution's theory as to, how much sort of volitional thought she's putting into it, how long she's spending on this.
Why is that key? Why is that key to the volitional thought? If the point of the defense is that she's in some sort of psychotic state and acting beyond control, and she's able to engage in complex maneuvers, why would it matter whether she managed to tie a granny knot or not? Like, well, I don't understand why that would even be relevant.
Because basically they're saying she's spending at the very least 6 minutes on, the actual strangling process.
Mm-hmm.
Versus the much shorter aspect. So that's kind of the and it's key for their sort of notion of she needed time, so therefore she's stalling this guy out. It is an essential part of the prosecution's theory, and
he called into her, or she called out to him.
What's that?
He at 5:33, he calls her or she calls him?
He calls her, doesn't reach her. She calls him back.
Okay. Fine. So, and then she tried to self-delete, and she tried multiple methods of self-deletion, right?
Yes.
So are you aware of what different methods she employed?
So she cut, and I'm going to avoid description.
I know you're a very skilled YouTube content creator. We all understand that you're trying to work around the metes and bounds of what's permitted. So the first thing involved involved the forearm, south of the forearm section with a blade, right?
Yes, and then also injury to neck, and then finally
also with the blade.
Yes.
Okay.
And then also jumping out of the window.
I noticed in a lot of pictures her hair seemed like it was drenched.
Yeah, I mean, she lands in snow, and
she laid there for a while. So
yeah, there's dispute over whether or not she had bruising, but it doesn't appear that anybody actually checked for bruising. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, isn't that surprising, because at the time she's got a broken neck, so that neck injury is much more of a concern than all of that. So
okay.
Now, I mean,
what's with the crushed pills that you referenced earlier?
So the crushed pills may not have even been pills, because they never actually test it. But there is an observation that there's a powdery residue in a glass. And they have this psychiatrist who actually provides, he testifies that because there was no mortar and pestle, it would be laborious to crush up pills. And this is the kind of thing that I thought that really lowered my impression of this psychiatrist, because it's not difficult to crush up pills. People do it with spoons. People do it. So, I mean, I was sitting in a little hotel room, and I did a little short where I was like, okay, here's me doing it with the bottom of a glass. Here's me doing it with a beer bottle. Here's using a cell phone charger. And then finally I was like, here's an onion. And, so clearly you don't need specialized tools to crush up pills.
Right.
But at the end of it, they, the cross-examination went a different approach, which was, how do you know this was drugs or medication or anything in, that was there? And he's like, well, I don't. We never tested it. It's like, oh, so you just made that up. It's like, yeah, I guess. He's like, well, Patrick observed the powder. Cool, but you don't know what the powder is.
Right. And for all you know,
So-
it's Metamucil.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the kind of thing that they really ought to have tested
You would
if
think?
they wanted to run a better, run a better case, right? There are various aspects of how this was run, and I see people
Can I
who are
show
like,
you a short, by the way, that you created?
oh, sure.
This is the
Crushing
this is his short that he was just referencing.
pills is really a challenge if you don't have the right equipment, if you don't have like a mortar and a pestle that they might have in a pharmacy. And so what I
That's
wondered
great.
about was that
He's got the testimony going in the background while he's actually crushing pills with like just a glass.
process of crushing the pills to the point that they were powder in order then to put
I
them
should have used the edge of the beer
One
bottle.
and then drink them. And so that is, to crush pills, significant number of pills into fine powder is not an easy thing to do, particularly if you don't have the right equipment. It's just kind of a laborious process. So
That's great. Well done,
I mean,
brother.
this guy just opens himself up to mockery there.
Yeah.
And the thing is, for the people out there who say like she should be frying, you should be pissed at the prosecution. You really should, because the prosecution has dropped the ball. I think that if the prosecution ran this case differently, the entire narrative around this would be different.
Well,
But
speaking of
at
which,
the-
I want to come back to this point that Branka made a long time ago. So now we're up to this part of the story. What is the evidence of psychosis or irresistible compulsion that existed prior to the moment of killing?
And this is the thing, there really isn't any. That's her argument is basically that this came about at that moment and disappeared after that moment. That is, I think, a kind of critical element for the prosecution, and one that the prosecution really should have hammered on more.
Yeah, I think that question should be
Now
that
there
should be
isn't,
the first, second, third, and last question is
now that's not actually a legal requirement, right? Because if you consider sort of let's imagine we consider a sort of a different hypothetical, right? You're driving in a car, you crash your car, you hit your head. And because of the hitting your head, you have brain swelling and you are completely out of your skull at the point when somebody rolls up. The ambulance shows up and they're like, we want to help you. And you are just completely, you're suffering from a head injury.
right.
And you think that the ambulance is there to kill you, and you pull out a gun and you start shooting at them.
Right.
At that point, there might be no prior psychosis, and the psychosis might resolve 10 minutes later when your brain swelling goes down.
Mm-hmm.
That would still meet the test. The
Right.
other thing here is that
But then you sort of need that. You need that if you want a jury to accept that as actually the reality of what happened, you sort of need to have that triggering moment, which is beyond her
and-
control. And
this is where the prosecution could easily have won their case, right? This is how the prosecution should have been arguing their case. It's not. And the problem is that the prosecution came into this with a completely different theory than they're ending it with. And so they ran their case based on that other theory, and they end up kind of bombing their case because of it.
you have to ask how they what was the thought process with that initial theory? Because presumably they had interviewed the witnesses who they're planning on putting on the stand, so that,
You'd hope.
and they're thinking, and you would think that they're asking them, tell us all the signs that she was a terrible mother. Do you think that she was a terrible mother, before you go out there in your opening and just start making that claim? It's ridiculous.
You would think that they would have talked to their witnesses and, figured all of that out. But I think that they, I think the prosecution sort of got fixated on an idea and went with that. The other problem that the prosecution has here is the law in this particular, in Massachusetts, is actually very much in favor of the accused.
Right.
Like in Canada, I don't think she'd have a shot, because in Canada, the standard is she has to establish that she is, that she meets the standard on a balance of probabilities. That would be her burden.
Right.
In Massachusetts, it's the Commonwealth's burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was not experiencing any of these things. And so if they don't actually, if they don't run a good case, they have a very serious
the default assumption is that she was
Yep.
having a psychotic episode, and
So-
you're making a really important point. And I touched on the law for pleading insanity yesterday, but I want to, just for those people who missed yesterday's episode, just to catch you up to speed. In most jurisdictions in this country, they use what's called the McNaughton rule, the McNaughton law, which basically says that you have to have no idea that what you're doing is remotely wrongful. Like you basically think that you're playing a video game and don't realize that you're actually holding like a real gun, or you think that you're shooting, you think that you're shooting at bats and you're actually shooting at humans, or that they're aliens. So where you actually have no understanding at all of what you're doing, that's the type of insanity, and only that type of insanity would get you off of not guilty by reason of insanity. And the result of that, and this applies in all scenarios, that in Massachusetts and all jurisdictions, when someone gets convicted of not guilty by reason of insanity, that doesn't mean they just skip on home and they're done. It means they get locked away until a team of experts comes to a conclusion that they're no longer insane, and that could be longer than the duration of a prison sentence that they would have faced, or considerably shorter. It's really, it's really up to whatever panel of experts is assessing her, his or her development, and through the course of treatment over the ensuing years after they're convicted of, or they're found not guilty by reason of insanity. Now, I laid out the McNaughton rule, but they in Massachusetts use the model penal code, which says it doesn't have to be that you don't understand, but if you feel a compulsion that's beyond your control to engage in the illegal act, and you don't have control over that would be considered not guilty by reason of insanity. So you might know that you're committing a very evil deed. Unlike the McNaughton defendants, you do know that you're actually harming other people, but you feel absolutely you're powerless to stop yourself from doing it. So that comes from the model penal code. That's what Massachusetts employs, and as my friend over here, a very learned peer, is pointing out, that in Massachusetts, it's not simply that they employ the model penal code standard of, either McNaughton or it's beyond your control, but they even go so far as to put the burden on the states and start from this default position that a defendant who claims not guilty by reason of insanity was indeed insane, and the burden is on the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they were not insane. And if you cannot prove that, in that case, we're going to accept the claims of the defendant, and that's what is potentially shielding Lindsay Clancy here, unless the state manages to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that she was not guilty by that she was not psychotically insane. Was that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, the prosecution has boxed themselves into a spot that they didn't need to be in. And at the end of the day, a lot of this, controversy comes about because of that. But, I think a lot of people who are sympathetic would be less sympathetic if the prosecution was run differently. Similarly, I think a lot of people who are unsympathetic have not watched the full trial because there's
Right.
a lot of, dialogue around it. There are elements of her story that are absolutely tragic. And,
Well, share that.
well, it seems like she was looking for help, and it seems like she wasn't getting meaningful help. So this I think everybody would have been happier if we could go back on a on a time machine or whatever, and get different treatment. Then that we'd be happier, right? And Will saying most pills crush easily, some like extended release. We have no evidence that these were even pills that were crushed, let alone that they were extended release pills. So, yeah. The Mithril King says, is that why she kept lying to the people she was trying to get help from? Yeah, this is something that happens. And part of it is because our system is not really set up very well for that. Our system is set up for liability issues. It's not really well set up for making it easy for people to disclose particular issues.
But I think people, and a lot of people are blaming Big Pharma for this, and saying, I saw Candace Owens, for example, went out there and she's like, this is Big Pharma. And I've seen a lot of the Lindsay defenders, Lindsay sympathizers basically, say that she was, express exactly what you just expressed and what I asked you to express. And, my question ultimately to them is, everyone loves saying the system is really terrible. Have you heard of anyone recommending what way would this, if you could rewrite the system, right? So you have a woman in a similar circumstance, okay? We'll call her, some woman, Mandy, is is a mother of several kids and experiencing the psychological breakdown that, let's assume, Lindsay was actually suffering from, okay? Where she is starting to think about actually having ideations of self-harm and harming her own children, okay? What system do you think we could employ that would be a better way of ensuring that she does not actually go through with harming her children?
I mean, I've talked about this in the firearm context, so a slightly different one, but we really should have a system that aims to restore somebody who has a psychological issue to their original state once they have recovered. Because what ends up happening is, like, let's imagine you have serious depression, right? And let's imagine you check yourself into a psych facility. Well, when you get out, you probably can't get a gun anymore. You may be restricted in all sorts of other ways. And so people who are aware of the system may have a very strong incentive to be like, no, I'm fine, even though they're definitely not fine. And so I end up dealing with this in the gun owner context in Canada with people who are like, they refuse to get help right up until like things go very badly. And that's because they didn't want to end up losing their firearms. In her case, had she disclosed the full extent of this, she would have lost her kids. She would have lost her, nursing, all of that. If there was a sort of a better ramp for that isn't like jumping off a cliff, that doesn't make her afraid of the system, maybe we have a different result here. And maybe you have, 3 children who, are alive. That's got nothing
to do with Big Pharma. That's basically, you're saying, our Child Protective Services and the rules
it's not
guidelines.
Really a Big Pharma thing. It's a how our system functions thing, right?
It's our Child Protective Services system. Here's the flaw in what you're
right?
Here's the flaw in what you're advocating for, though. Okay,
I'm not saying it's perfect, so there's lots of flaws.
But here's the problem. Okay, is that now you're basically putting someone who has seen, put yourself in the shoes of someone who now has to make the call to give the kids back to a parent who was causing harm, and I think that they're sort of putting themselves in what's a potentially uncomfortable position of them being the one putting back the children in the care of the parents, and having concerns that ultimately some harm will come to those children as a result of that decision, and that's something that they're going to have to live with. So, but I guess we take children. I guess, as a state, we take children away all the time. People have drug issues or something like that, and then we end up giving them back once those drug issues seem to have cleared up. So I guess presumably there would be a way of doing something like that with respect to mental health as well. But I think a lot of the outrage that you probably hear from people is coming from the fact that, like, at the end of the day, we have 3 dead babies. And
and I get that.
And they were betrayed. And they were betrayed by the very person whose life mission is to basically nurture, love, and take care of them. And she snuffed them out.
And if your position is, look, we need to eliminate the insanity defense, okay. If your position is she's not, that she doesn't meet the test, then you should be angry at the prosecutors. Because if you're fine with the insanity defense existing, but you don't think she meets it, you should be angry with the prosecutors. Because at this point, my prediction for the jury is about 75-25, right?
That 75%
that they're going to go not guilty, reason of insanity. And 25%, and that means that, of course, I'm not certain, right? The jury can go either way.
Right.
And my personal feelings as to, what is going on here are different than, like, what the legal test gets you to. Because at the end of the day, like, I don't know, and I have 2 very plausible possibilities in my head. And if you asked me to decide on a balance of probabilities, that's a very different thing than what the jury is being asked to do.
Which is beyond reasonable doubt.
Because the jury can think it is more likely than not that she intentionally killed them. The jury can think that it is very probably that she intentionally killed them.
But that there is that possibility that she.
But so long as there is the possibility,
a reasonable possibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why, if I was the state, I think I would have hammered so hard in almost like in labeling this psychotic. What was the term they used?
Psychosis.
In labeling this psychosis as like a magic psychosis, that she comes into court with this magic psychosis that no one else has ever experienced before. That the first time it ever pops up, the magic psychosis pops up is right after Patrick leaves, after she sends Patrick away. So first she Googles how long it takes Patrick to go away and how long he's going to be gone for. And then she enters into this magic psychosis where a voice is coming and talking to her. And unlike in any other psychosis case where that voice tends to be around for a while before it first shows up, this is the first time that it comes up. And then this magic psychosis came along and kept talking, whereas most cases, an outside voice, that science is familiar with, the outside voice would not be as persistent patter of talking in the ear. And then this
Bettero used to be a prosecutor.
What?
Bettero on Twitter used to be a prosecutor.
Yeah.
I think he could have had the conviction. I think if he'd run this, I'd be sitting at my conviction versus not
would
guilty
be like 90-10.
Yeah. 90-10, 80-20, something like that, right?
I would hit very hard. I mean, that's what I would have done, is I would have basically hit very hard on the fact that this is the most convenient psychosis that any defendant has ever tried claiming, and completely the antithesis of what conventional science has ever seen for a normal psychosis. And that she seems to have done a very poor job in researching how her story should have gone. That's that, and basically made it as like, she basically looked this up and came up with this and did a poor job, because she should have been claiming a lot of other things that she never claimed. And there was no psychosis. She just recognized this was a window of opportunity, and she called that window of opportunity to free herself of what she considered an unbearable burden. That she called that window of opportunity psychosis.
And Yeah, I mean,
that's how I would have.
I'm never going to
that
have a
would have been
time
my.
machine to know what's happening here. And
I'm not saying that's what
I don't,
happened.
per-
I'm
you
saying
know,
that
I don't.
I want to be clear. I'm not saying that's what happened because I wasn't there. I don't know. What
Yeah.
I'm saying is, if I was prosecuting this case, that's how I would have presented it. Do you not think that that's a far more compelling thing than what you just described? Because what you described to me was just.
Yeah, I
Awful.
think the prosecution should have made completely different arguments. And this is one of the things that's annoyed me or angered me as I watched this trial is the prosecution playing a bunch of shitty games to like be manipulative and like emotionally play on things when
How
they
so?
should have just built a better argument.
How so? Can you give
They
examples?
baited a mistrial repeatedly by like trying to bring in Catholicism. And so they were like asking, well, isn't this a mortal sin? And it's like, okay, that's wildly improper. Like that is totally impermissible.
Yeah.
And they're actually creating the possibility that they're creating this entire possibility that they could have spiked the trial. Like they came really close to spiking this trial. And basically the only reason they didn't is because it's a triple homicide trial. But, if it had been a lesser trial, I think the judge probably would have tossed it over the prosecution's repeated moves on that. And it's like, it's so unnecessary. It's so, unneeded. Just build a better case.
Unless perhaps they recognized that their opening sucked, and that's why they were looking for a mistrial to get a do-over and start all over again.
The thing is if they got a mistrial on that, it's very likely it would have been a mistrial with prejudice for intentionally provoking it.
Potentially.
At which point, it's as good as an acquittal. Like she walks out the door.
Worse. That's worse than then she would just walk, right?
Yeah. So I mean, and that would be a result that I think nobody thinks is a good result here.
Everyone would think that's horrible. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, like, unless you're one of the people out there who's like, oh yeah, she's completely innocent, Patrick is this like mastermind or whatever else. Unless you're one of those weirdos, even if you're like, okay, the people out there who are, standing outside the courthouse, I think most of them still at the end of the day want her to be locked in a mental hospital for the rest of the time. Right. And, I think it would be an absolutely messed up scenario if they provoked a mistrial and, blew it up. And they came close,
Fortunately, that didn't happen.
in front of a different judge. That could have happened. It could have been the judge says, I'm declaring a mistrial with prejudice.
What do you think about this judge so far? Speaking of.
This judge has let a lot of stuff happen that should not have happened in the case. The prosecutor can't can't direct a witness because every witness she gets up, she's just leading the fuck out of them. And I think the reason why she has to lead the fuck out of them is that they don't really agree with her theory, right? Her theory of like what was going on isn't the theory that ends up coming out. So, she needs to prep her witnesses so that they can tell their own story. But instead, she's just like, and then this happened, and she'll go for like 5 minutes and say, correct. And their witness is like, yes. And then the defense objects occasionally, not nearly enough, with like leading. And the judge is like, I'm going to allow it. And I'm like, why are you allowing this? This is blatantly improper. And so this has also created a potential appeal issue that, like, why do we have an appeal issue here? Now, I mean, I saw somebody in the chat mentioning, what about the possibility of the jury hanging? If the jury hangs and I'm the DA, I'm like, okay, we're going to retry this. And these two prosecutors are out.
Yeah, you would pop champagne probably if you get
it would be like this, this is a good outcome because we get to retry it and we get to
do it right
dump
and get
these
better
two prosecutors and get some better people in here.
So I want to get to the social element here that Baba Yoga brought up, which says, dudes, before marriage dating, use this case as a litmus test. You'll find all the crazy before it's too late. Chat trolls, if you really believe you're innocent, express it with a super chat or STFU. I'm totally in support of that. And the social issues are actually how I ended up bringing Ian on tonight. And it started that I dropped a post yesterday, and I think this is a good time to start addressing this. And I was quote tweeting Tim Pool. Tim Pool was talking about how women are getting angry that men are dumping them over the Lindsay Clancy support. It's real and it's good. And I will come. I just want to play. Let me just
wanting to. Oh yeah.
Let me just give the whole background. Let me give the background, and then you can rant to your heart's content. I'll let you go and go as long as you want. Okay. So just for people who are not familiar with the background here, so Tim Pool was saying, and if you're unfamiliar with this, that a lot of people, basically a lot of guys, are basically going to their girlfriend. He shares a story here of a woman who says that her boyfriend of 4 years forced her to come to an opinion. She didn't know anything about the Lindsay Clancy case. He followed up with her saying, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And she ended up supporting Lindsay Clancy. And he said, I'm done with you. I can't date someone who thinks that what she did here, deserves sympathy. And Tim Pool was basically saying, it's good. This is a good litmus test, as Baba Yogi was saying over here. And I happen to agree with that. I certainly, even I didn't really express my agreement with that, other than I pointed out the reality as I see it. And the reality is, as I wrote here, admitting you support Lindsay Clancy waves 3 huge red flags. And I'm not talking about some married woman who's married for 15 years. If you're married 15 years and your wife tells you that she supports Lindsay Clancy and now you're basically walking out the door on her, I think this should not be the straw that breaks the camel's back. But when people are dating, they're looking for insight into who their potential significant other is. And there's all these different things that I think you are telling your boyfriend when you say you support Lindsay Clancy. And that's why I say you're basically telling him from what he hears. You might not be saying these words. You might in your brain be thinking this. But what he hears is you have too little regard for children. You don't realize just how poor you're going to be, a self-involved mother who puts yourself above your children. And you're too stupid to realize I didn't want to hear this from you. You should have lied to me. It would have been better if you lied to me and just pretended and just said, F Lindsay, because that's what I as a guy want to hear. And the reason I want to hear, and I tried giving this example to some women who came out, and a bunch of them came out attacking me on this. And I wasn't trying to upset anyone here, but I'm sharing with you what I think is the true lay of the land. If you don't have children, if you have a pet, imagine someone saying to you, I can understand situations where just, the pressures mount and the person doesn't get enough help, and they would take their pet and twist its neck until it's dead. And now ask yourself, would you ever want to leave your pet in that person's care? And you would say, hell no. I would rather leave it in the woods than leave it with this person. Even though they're talking about a theoretical abstract case, you basically say, this thing that's so precious to me, I would never entrust them with that. Now, as a guy who's looking at a potential mate, forming a family with this, and looking at their children as their offspring, their legacy, something that they will, in a healthy situation, value more than their own selves. They're sacrificing their entire lives for their children. And the idea that there could be a set of circumstances that his future mate can envision, wherein she might be the one who, instead of nurturing and supporting them, would end up causing them harm, and then expect that, well, based on those circumstances, you should understand and be sympathetic. I can understand a guy just basically saying adios. And I'll tell you something like this. If one of my sons told me that some girl he was dating said that, I would tell him, this is not the right girl. That's what I would say. Because I'd be like, that you have to recognize that the objective as a parent is you're self-sacrificing. And I don't care. Look, I don't know what the future is going to bring. I mean, I don't know what kind of psychosis, if it's a real McNaughton situation and the woman thinks it's a lizard child that's there and doesn't realize what she's doing, that's a different thing. But to tell me that we should sympathize with someone that she just felt so much stress and now we should feel boohoo for her rather than the 3 little baby caskets we've got in our local cemetery. I'm like, you're just not recognizing what you're asking of a guy to basically say, oh yeah, that's totally cool. I'm totally cool with that. Now, this is not to say she should be found guilty. I don't, based on what Ian has been spelling out, I can understand a reasonable jury coming to the conclusion that she's not guilty by reason of insanity. But that's different from saying, I support Lindsay. I want to share I want to give money to Lindsay. That she's like someone who I worry for Lindsay. It's like, no, I'd be praying for the souls of those poor kids, and you should feel. I mean, it's if you don't feel. Frankly, you look at someone who does this and you feel a level of contempt, and that's a natural, normal thing. But now I ranted and I got out first, and I'm gonna let you go for as long as you want in response, and I will not cut you off.
Court cases are really shit at being social movements, and people need to stop using them for this, because everybody wants a court case to mean more than it means. And court cases are decided on their specific exact facts. So you get people who are like, I support Amber Heard because domestic violence is bad. And it's like, okay, but like, is that what this case actually is? The answer is no, because, it's not actually about the larger, no court case is about the larger philosophy. And so they're really poor examples for anything, especially because court cases really can come down to absolutely like fine distinctions of, and at the start of this, and I'm not trying to bash you here, but you had a thought, that you got probably, from somewhere, that she had Googled, how long to, strangle a child or whatever it was, right? And that's not correct. And, and good on you for looking it up. But the thing is it's really easy for people to get different ideas about these things and different, things. And so you end up having different takes on a case because you've got, you think one detail is more significant than another or whatever else. So at the end of the day, I'm like, I'm not going to use a court case as a decision-making factor. Now, I mean, if my wife was going, you know what, I really think it's great she killed some kids, I'd be like, that is not cool, right? But if she's like, I think it's tragic that she had a mental health breakdown, and, I'm like, okay, I can see where you'd get to that, right? Like, it's a different thing. And I think that it's possible to recognize that there's a tragedy and also possible to recognize that this is horrible. And at the end of the day, like, nobody should be like, I hope nobody out there is like, I hope Lindsay Clancy gets released so that like we can get married and, have kids. Like, I don't think anybody's there, right? I don't think anybody's out there going, I hope Lindsay Clancy gets released so that she can babysit my kids, right? Nobody wants her to go back to, being a pediatric nurse or anything like that. The question is basically, how much should we kick her in the teeth? And, are we really going to have a big societal war on like, I think we should kick her 20 times versus I think we should kick her 2 times? That's sort of where this dispute is once you rule out the people who are just completely crazy. And I certainly agree. There are some people whose reasoning on all of this is completely like non-existent. The people who are like, she didn't do it, it's Patrick Clancy or whatever else. Those people we can rule out, and we can just be like, it's the same way that if you do a survey and you ask things like, not just did we land on the moon, things like, does the moon exist? You'll get like, there's always like 15% of the people who will say like, no, the moon is a conspiracy. Like, because there's a certain percentage of people in society who are just, on any topic, they're just, so I don't know. A lot of this feels like, especially that particular Reddit hypothesis or Reddit scenario. Mm-hmm. And I mean, nothing on Reddit that somebody says happened probably happened, so it's probably faked. But this notion of like, I made somebody look at a case they weren't really interested in, and then I asked them to come up with a theory, like a thought about that case, is like, okay, so they came up with a shitty thought about a case because they looked at it from like a lengthy perspective. I'm like, this is not a good societal test, right? And I don't know. People want to fight about this one more than I think it needs to be fought about. There's, at the end of the day, it's a court case. It's not a societal bellwether in any sense. And the people wanting to make it one are wrong. The same way the people who wanted to make Rittenhouse a societal bellwether, or, Depp, or any of these things. That's not what courts are about. It's not what they're for. And we need to stop doing it.
Well, I'll try to steelman even further your position on this, okay? And I'm going to lift from a comedian named Bill Burr. You familiar with Bill Burr, the redheaded guy?
Yep.
Okay. So he will often address controversial political topics in his humor, and he has a bit where he basically is talking about domestic violence, and he's basically saying, you'll see all these women talk show and Oprah saying, there's never a reason. There's never a reason. There's never a reason. And he's like, no, I'm going to say this. And I know that when I start saying this, everyone's going to start looking at me and saying all these different things. Okay. It's wrong. You don't do it. You never do it. But don't tell me that there's, and those guys who go out there and, they come home from work and they're like, tuna casserole, pow. Like, those people are scum. They're terribly, awful people. But he basically starts, presenting a scenario where he's like, someone is basically working on a bridge in the freezing cold weather for 14 hours, and they come home, and they're providing for their family, and they come home and they find, their neighbor is in bed with their wife. There's reasons. There are reasons. You don't do it. Don't tell me there's never a reason. And I think a lot of guys, when the bit kills, it's awesome. I ruined it rather than doing it proper justice. But the point that I'm getting at is, when you hear that bit, you're like, yeah, okay, I can understand it. Now, in a sense, I sort of almost look at this as the real life equivalent of that type of thing from these women who are standing up for Lindsay, where they're basically like, look, you can't go doing what she did. What she did was terrible. It was evil. It was awful. But to pretend that there was no reason here at all, as if she just acted willy-nilly out of nothing, is really not doing justice to the plight that she was suffering. So anyone who basically enjoyed that the bit from Bill Burr from the reverse side of the coin, from the male side of the coin. So if you take a step back and think about it from the female side of the coin, and the hormonal and chemical and physical, psychological, and emotional damage that some women endure and sustain as a result of childbirth and the natural hormones that come with that, and having a kid who's colicky, and the other pressures of small children and stuff like that, that society doesn't just sort of washes that away and says grin and bear it, rather than giving the proper levels of support. And that they're basically saying, like, that they look at Lindsay as someone who cracked under the stress, and it's terrible that she cracked, and it's a terrible tragedy. And again, I'm talking about the normal people, not the crazies, the ones that Ian here is talking about. But let's not just pretend that this was just like, oh, she was just la-di-da shopping and sprees all the time, really happy, and she was frustrated she couldn't go to a club, so she said, let me just kill my 3 kids and claim psychosis. That she actually was dealing with struggles that the everyday woman can relate to, and in that sense, they feel as if she's getting maligned as being a monster, when they themselves can feel levels of frustration that feel incredibly overwhelming, and they look at it as society is punching them in the face, and they're like, I can understand a woman feeling overwhelmed, and they're sympathizing more with her feeling of being overwhelmed than they are with the monstrous act of killing her own children. Is that a fair? I'll ask your feedback on what I just threw out there.
I mean, at the end of the day, this is a messed up case. There is no good outcome, because the good outcome would be somehow we can, bring the kids back. That's not there. I saw somebody in the chat saying, like justice for these kids, bless these prosecutors. And I'm like, if you want to see her go to jail forever, you should be pissed at these prosecutors. Like,
Yeah.
I don't get this. And I don't get this because I saw it with the Karen Reed trial where people are like, Karen Reed needs to go to jail and this prosecutor is awesome. And I'm like, and like Proctor is awesome. And I'm like, if you think Karen Reed should go to jail, you should fucking hate Proctor.
Yeah.
If you think that Lindsay Clancy should go to jail, you should hate these prosecutors. Like, that is kind of the nature of these things. But I mean, somebody just sent me Polymarket, and Polymarket right now has conviction versus not guilty by reason of insanity at 32%. And so, like, you got some real possibility to make money, folks, if you are certain there's going to be a conviction here, but it shouldn't be sitting around 32% on these circumstances, right?
Right.
It just shouldn't be.
It sounds as if there's a lot of ways to motivate a jury to thoroughly disbelieve her that got left on the cutting room floor from what the prosecutors presented.
I think I could have run a better case. I think that, I think that many other lawyers I know could have run a better case. And I think that if you see a not guilty by reason of insanity, you can write a thank you letter to the prosecution for helping make that happen. I only look at cases really based on what evidence, like I call cases based on what the evidence is at trial. And I don't think this is a good case for like a big societal thing, because a lot of this case comes down to how was the case run? That is the thing, right? I think that we'd be having a very different discussion here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is wild to me, for instance, that the prosecution didn't find an expert who was particularly a specialist in postpartum depression, and especially, and to be a little crass here, a female expert in postpartum depression, because it is a major own goal for the prosecution to bring on old white male psychologist after old white male psychologist with a jury that is now 9-3 women. You better believe there's going to be a discussion in that back room about and they're going to end up disregarding some of these experts, notwithstanding their credentials. They're going to say, well, these are guys, they don't understand. That's a prosecution fuck up, because you have to understand, you got to bring some actual, you've got to play the case you've got, right? You will see other cases where, if you watch some of the other cases, they will choose which prosecutor, or which defense lawyer questions, whichever witness. And that's based on some tactical considerations. Johnny Depp trial, they bring out Camille Vasquez to do the cross of Amber Heard. That wasn't by accident.
Yeah.
Wasn't by accident.
No. No, that was, you didn't want to make her sympathetic and like she's getting beaten up by a guy.
It's a tactical mistake.
When she's purportedly a domestic violence survivor, a domestic abuse survivor, you don't want to make the jury sympathize that she's getting beaten up by another guy. So, yeah. And you want her to get beaten up. So basically, that's why you make it a girl fight.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tactical consideration. This is a tactical consideration that was there for the prosecution, and they didn't take it, which leads us to the question of why. There's all sorts of things I would have run very differently if I was the prosecution in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And simple facts.
Yeah.
But I caught some heat on my channel for saying I don't think that Clancy is a person that people should be celebrating. But you can still say she deserves a fair trial. She deserves every protection that the law gives anybody.
Right.
Because the instant we start setting fire to the law, now we're just in, now we're just in whatever. So,
and here's the thing, and I agree with 90% of what you just said. That a case is a very unique, fact-specific, unique animal, and to just try to make this about a whole social movement is kind of backward. And the prosecutors, I certainly can't argue, based on how you presented what they did, that there was a failure by the way they presented the case, which has now left open a wider door than possible for her defense to succeed in obtaining a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity. And if that is in fact why she ends up succeeding, I think that's probably frustrating to a lot of people, that it's poor lawyering is what ends up being the difference maker in a case. It makes you, whenever there's poor lawyering by either side, it makes you feel as if it's not justice prevailing. It's just, one lawyer being better at what they do than the other. And I think that, but when we come to the societal element of things, okay, and as far as guys using this as a case, as a sort of a benchmark, and I think you can make a fair point that, if a woman actually watched the trial and saw what a terrible case was presented by the prosecution,
I don't think anybody should use any case as a benchmark, because that's not what they're for, and it's not
right.
how they work.
I understand that, but you also deal with I understand what you're saying, what people should do, but what I'm saying to you is, if you're trying to assess whether you're compatible with another person, you're going to use social touch points of the day to try and get a read for what this person is going to be like in the future.
I just put it in the
circumstances.
same category as the TikTok videos with women talking about getting the ick over, some guy over whatever. It's the same thing in my view. It's like, all right, you have a different, people find reasons to sort of, to fight with each other and to separate over things.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if that's how people approach relationships, you're probably going to die alone. If your approach to relationships is looking for reasons, the big red flag in that discussion wasn't, to me, her response. It's the whole thing of, I set my girlfriend up with this test about whether or not I'm going to bail on her. Because I've dated the women who do that, where they're
you see, that's how you're presenting, and there are tons of women who do that.
I mean, that is what the guy said he did. He set up a test.
There are tons of women who do that. It's the girl claims that that's what he was doing. It's not a test to see whether you fail. It's a test really to see, are you going to be self-sacrificing for my children? And that I can understand. I think that you're being a little bit too dismissive. I respectfully disagree with you on this. That I think you're being a little bit too dismissive of the importance of getting a flavor for how this person will deal with certain circumstances and where they put their values. Now, if you want to tell me that it's an unfair test because, if you're watching the trial and you see what a crappy job, and you were sitting in the jury box, if you were a juror watching this trial, you would think that there's no way she's guilty here. Again, there's a difference between saying not guilty and saying, I'm going to be sending her $100. Because I feel so terrible for her.
Yeah, I don't understand why people have sent her a whole pile of money. I just don't,
Right. So if you saw your girlfriend was sending her $100, would that not trouble you?
I mean, I don't know how I'd find out, but
if she just said, I just sent $100 to Lindsay Clancy, I can't believe what they're putting that poor woman through.
I'd just be like, why? We got better stuff to spend money on.
Right, but what I'm saying is I can understand a guy saying, yeah, that's very warped values. That's something that really bothers me. Now you want to tell me they shouldn't be presenting as a test? Okay, I understand that that's just a functional thing as to whether or not we should be testing our mates, and that's more of just like a dating and relationship type of approach. It's less about society and certainly the law in this particular case. But to those people who are trying to glean and read into their mate, I can understand them using this test, and I can and reaching that conclusion. Maybe not throwing it out there as a test because that's a crappy thing to do to someone you're dating, but to just sort of, I would force an opinion out of them that's a little bit much. But I would,
the way it was phrased was basically like, I wasn't interested in this trial.
And he forced an opinion.
He made me to go look at the trial. I expressed some thought, and then he demanded to know what I thought about it. I sort of gave some thoughts, and then he's pissed. And it's like, yeah, that is lame behavior, right?
Right. I can get that. I can get that. But I do understand the other side of it, of like, man, these people are like, that
and at the end of the day, dating is kind of a unique perspective, because at the end of the day, I don't think anybody's required to be reasonable in dating.
Right.
Like if you want to dump somebody because you think their ears are too big, like, well,
let me throw this at you.
You can.
Do you think it's unreasonable for a guy to say, I want my wife to be someone who would rather die than ever see any harm come to our children, much less harm them herself?
I mean, and the thing is I think that in order to get to this, you got to have some nuance, right? Because, like, I think that if this guy went back to his girlfriend and was like, what do you think she should have done in this circumstance? Would it have been better if she just, unalived herself rather than the kids? She'd be like, absolutely, that would have been better. Because I don't think anybody is going to disagree with that.
Oh, I think some would. I think a lot would. I think you're saying that there's at least that 15% you referenced earlier who would definitely not say that.
Fair.
And I think it's probably a lot more than 15%.
I suspect that guy's girlfriend, from that post probably would have been like, yeah, that is where I land as well. Just, that's, but I don't know, right? We're reading a lot into a Reddit post, which is dangerous because nothing on Reddit actually happens.
It's real.
In real life anyway,
I wrangled 2 hours out of Runkle, and he's been amazing. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I want to get through the last of our chats here, and then wrap up over here, if that's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely. You got some angry folks in the chat, though.
Kimmy says, as an RN, I'll tell you, it's very possible she was researching hallucinations to come up with the best alibi, the most convincing terms for the right type of hallucination to recite to be convincing. Yeah, I think a lot of people who think that this was not a real psychotic episode would come to that conclusion. And I think
the prosecution did a poor job of exploring that argument, because that is a decent argument, but they did a poor job of exploring it.
Okay. And you definitely know better than I would. Aquamarine says, this reminds me of Germanwings Flight 9525. The creator mentor pilot did a very good documentary about the story of that pilot. Okay. I'm not familiar with that story. Michigan Farm Boy says, the psychiatric profession is afraid, and somewhat rightly so, of the liability of giving back rights, kids, nursing, license, firearms, etc. They don't get qualified immunity like a judge, DA, or cop. And that was what I was touching on. Like, in this optimal type of scenario we're trying to create, if I was in that role, I'd be terrified to ever give the kids back, because, what the hell happens is something, if I was too kind in my assessment of the patient and they end up going out there and doing something, disastrous, that, people are going to come looking at me, and I can, aside from the civil, potential.
There's a lot of liability protection built into how we handle things.
Right. You would think the state would help ensure the civil liability, but
yeah.
And Bainbridge says, I've talked to people, they rank mental hospitals worse than prisons. Also, could the state have just accepted the NGRI plea? They probably could have. I'm sure they could have accepted that. Why not?
They could have, yeah. There are situations where you'll have like a joint proposal for NGRI, and mental hospitals are really, really depressing. Especially because, like, the people she's going to be with are going to be people in like florid psychosis.
Yeah,
it's I don't know that it's going to be an easy time.
Kimmy's saying they'll let her go after a few years not hearing voices, and she already hasn't heard any since 2023. And I think that's the fear a lot of people who are upset about this case have, is that we're going to read in 2 years that she's been released on her own recognizance. Yeah. And like, well, no voices, and it's like she's already not hearing voices, so why don't you just let her walk? By that logic, and it certainly could happen. I don't think anyone can rule that out. Rye Harrison says, still trying to guess Joe's vape flavor just to lessen the heartbreak of this. Okay. Should I ruin it for you, or should I tell you the answer?
His vape flavor is actually Marlboros.
It used to be. I used to smoke unfiltered Camels.
Oh man.
Yeah, I was hardcore. I was hardcore. My nickname, everyone, like in one of my schools, called me Smoking Joe, because
So
I
now
always
you've
had a
moved
cigarette.
on.
I always had a cigarette dangling.
I'm just gonna go with more guesses. Scotch for your vape flavor.
No, no. I actually have a sweet tooth, so yeah. It's actually Mexico mango is the flavor there. So yeah, I find citrus is actually also very good if I can get my hands on citrus flavors. Fan of that as well. G Dav says maybe America shouldn't have declared independence. King George III had severe mental issues with visual hallucinations, so it wasn't his fault. Yeah. Can you further discuss the possibility of cognitive or volitional prongs of the McCool standard? It seems like those were met. I'm not familiar with the McCool standard. I don't do criminal defense. I don't know if you've looked into that or not.
So the McCool standard is the standard that Massachusetts uses.
I think it's spelled.
So,
I thought it was spelled C. I thought it was two C's. I thought it was spelled like the word cool, like not McCool.
No,
okay,
it's MCHOUL.
I'm just saying what my recollection. Because the last time I looked at the McCool standard, I think was when I was taking the bar. So
fair. So mental illness in and of itself is not sufficient. You've got to have a mental disease or defect, which is not defined, but is also not an issue here as to whether she had a mental disease or defect, because the prosecution at this point has conceded that she had a mental disease or defect. But then you have to go and get into the test for whether she's responsible, and that has two pathways, and the prosecution has to disprove both pathways. So they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that both pathways are not true. So the first is that you have to be able to appreciate the wrongfulness of their conduct. You have to be able to know right from wrong. You have to know that your specific action is wrong. So some examples of those things for mental health issues. If you imagine that like God has commanded you to do this thing, then it might be that would be the right thing to do, even though it's a terrible thing. Mm-hmm. I'm going to offend you here a little bit, but the whole thing of like, God saying sacrifice your kid, it's in the Bible. Now God stops him, but like that would be an example of if somebody had that delusion of somebody who doesn't appreciate the wrongfulness of their action. Similarly, if you thought somebody was like a lizard person and that, they were trying to destroy the earth, then, you wouldn't be able to appreciate the wrongfulness of your conduct, because it would actually potentially be a good thing to destroy a lizard person who's trying to, destroy the earth, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the second aspect is whether you have the ability to conform your conduct to the law, and that's specifically with respect to the particular action. So that's like, you might still know it's wrong, but if you feel like compelled and you can't resist it. So that's really the Lindsay Clancy position there, is basically that she was being compelled to action to be like, this must happen. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the
that's your cognitive and volitional prongs. Beautiful Messy Ball says, to be fair, it was all female doctors that failed her. She was saying, so bringing in female doctors, experts, might not have helped. I want to credit you, Beautiful Messy Ball, because I know that she was one of the people who was a fan of the show, who was furious, who seemed very upset with me for my position in this case. So I appreciate you coming in here to at least hear this dialogue. So thank you. And thanks for the Jules Germanicus. The test, if there is one, should be that you need to have a discussion about how they come to a decision, how they source info. They will have a longer lasting effects on a relationship. Okay. I mean, that's a reasonable. I think that's an important element, but that's something that you should really know. I would think. I would think you'd learn all this stuff like long beforehand. Like, to me, you should know. I don't have to ask my wife whether she would support Lindsay Clancy. I know that she would be horrified by what this woman did, and I don't need to ask her. I know that there's no way in hell she would ever support her. So if you're in a position that you actually are not sure, to me, I'm like, I think you already know the answer to like who your girl is, and there are people who are going to be more sympathetic and are going to basically fixate on the suffering that Lindsay had rather than the monstrous act that she had, that outcome of her actions. And yeah, I mean, as far as whether you think that that's the right person for you or not, you got to sort of have to make your own decisions on that. But I definitely understand people. I definitely understand people using it as a benchmark. I'm simply saying you probably have 1,000 other signals that let you know before you even ask her this question. If you're dating her, for 4 years, like they were allegedly doing in that particular Reddit post.
I don't believe that Reddit post actually happened. So
there's another post about someone who broke an engagement 2 weeks before the wedding because of her position supporting Lindsay Clancy, and I'm just like, I don't buy that. I don't buy that. There were a couple of posts over in Rumble that I sort of completely ignored. MS Idloy says, Ian said that his standard is higher in Canada. But in Canada, Guy Turcotte purposely took a substance before murdering his kids and then pleaded insanity. The court initially believed that defense. I don't know if you're familiar with the Guy Turcotte case.
Yeah, I believe that was one where he actually got a second trial.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it? So what happened? So in Canada, you can appeal an acquittal on questions of law. And so what ended up happening was that the judge gave the wrong instruction to the jury. And basically the judge instructed the jury that self-induced intoxication was, was an acceptable way of getting to not guilty by reason of insanity. And the court said, no, that is not acceptable. And so they directed a new trial. At the new trial, he was convicted of second-degree murder. And I can't remember. So second-degree murder, the mandatory minimum sentence is life. But I can't remember what his period of parole ineligibility was. But the Turcotte case is sort of notable for, for the fact that the judge got it wrong at the first trial.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all that happened there, is the judge told them, like, yeah, self-induced intoxication is fine, which is not the law here. So it got flipped.
Mm-hmm. Hands One Pack says the self-delete is consciousness of guilt would be my argument. I don't think that.
It's a good argument.
I mean, the reason I would counter back to that is because when she's relying on that second prong, that it was beyond her control, it's like she basically, if they present that argument, if I was for the defense, I would say back, yeah, she knew it was wrong. She just couldn't control herself. So she felt guilty that she did something that was beyond her control. So I don't know that argument would hold weight ultimately. See what I'm saying?
I mean, it very much goes to at least the one prong of appreciating the wrongfulness of her actions.
100%.
So you can attack that one. It might not help you at all on the other prong because, if something forced you to do something awful,
right?
Then you might want to unalive.
The person might want to, right.
And so it might be consistent with that, but it's still a worthwhile argument to make. I would still have made that if I was the prosecution.
One Pack also says she would not have lost the kids. Father would have had to take over, and she would have been hospitalized. I don't know how it would have played out. And it's possible, but. And he says, this is my compromise. We give her a non-guilty verdict due to insanity, treat her, move to Canada, and require her to enjoy MAID. She qualifies for being in a wheelchair. Okay. So you know what MAID is?
MAID, which is the medical assistance in dying.
Oh, there you go.
So, yeah.
That's okay. And finally, we have Lozo J saying, you can't prove she's crazy, but she deleted her kids. Well, a lot of people do evil things, and you can't say that that's indicia of insanity. Otherwise, everyone would go to a mental health place rather than
that's not the test at all.
Jail. So, yeah. So, anyway, Ian, I thank you so much for joining me. You want to tell people where they can find you and what you're about?
So my YouTube channel is Runkle of the Bailey. I suspect that a whole bunch of people in your chat are angry at me, so I don't know if they'll want to join me for anything other than trolling. But I mean,
that's their mistake.
They're welcome to do that. But you know, at the end of the day, there's a legal standard on this one, and you can be angry about it, but that's the way it is. You know, and again, if you're pissed at how this case goes when the verdict comes in, don't be pissed at me. It ain't my fault. It ain't my doing. Be pissed at the prosecutors, because if anybody pooched this, it would have been them. You know, if anybody pooched this case.
Yeah. Wisconsin Orange says, I would argue her attempt was attention-seeking and not true. Due to the fact of her medical training, she would have known how to properly do it, in my opinion. Well, when she's sitting in a wheelchair, from trying to off herself, it makes for a compelling claim that she was trying to do it. You know what I'm saying?
I think so what ends up happening on that point is the prosecutor was really leading into this was a fake attempt. And so at a certain point, Reddington is like, objection, they're arguing that this is a fake attempt. I want to get this other evidence in to suggest that it's not. And the prosecutors didn't want to get that other, you know, that other evidence in. So they said, we're not going to argue it's a fake, you know, that it's a fake attempt. And because of that, right, they were sort of hedged in. And really, if they wanted to argue that it was a fake attempt, they should have just said, bring your other evidence, defense. Like,
do you know what that evidence was?
I'm trying to remember. It was because we don't actually get to see the evidence because, you know, right. Reddington is like, we want to bring this in. But, you know, the prosecution really should have made the call to either run that as, you know, we think it's a real attempt from the start, or we think it's a fake attempt, and ride that all the way through and, you know, to wherever it lands. Trying to sort of ride both horses there didn't work out very well.
Yeah, it sounds like there was very poor planning on how they were going to run this thing from the gate. So, yeah, it's unfortunate. It really is. All right. Well, again, I thank you for joining me. I very much enjoyed this discussion. I don't want to.
Likewise, it's been way too long.
Yeah, it's been far too long. I need to get you back here in a couple months, and hopefully we'll have also, happier trials.
You're in Florida?
No, I'm in Jersey.
Okay, I was like, at some point I need to start like visiting places in the U.S.
Yeah, if you ever come to the New York region, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely, because it'd be good to properly lift a drink with you at some point.
Amen. So. That'd be great. That'd be really great. All right, I thank you all for joining me, and I'm not sure when I'm going to be back. I'm going to remind you to please like, share, subscribe, hit that button, drop a comment in the algorithms. Drop a comment. It really helps the algorithm, and Lord knows I need anything I can get from the algorithm. If you need merch, check the link down in the description below, because we have merch now. There's new merch that should be coming out, God willing, next week. I'm very excited about that. And stay away from lab meat, because it's not meant for you. It's meant for they, them. And do not eat the bugs. Don't do it. Have a good night, everyone. As always, Godspeed.
The plane is landing. The show is almost over. All that's left for you is this song. Joe left the studio. He's probably drinking Diet Mountain Dew. Maybe he's watching funny videos on YouTube, or playing chess, or doing Jewy things Jews do. We hope you had fun, and maybe you learned something. You hit like and you subscribe. Leave a comment if you want to show some love. That would be cool. You can be cool. Leaving comments is cool. So till next time, please be sure to stay away from lab meat. It was never meant for you. It's meant for they or them or comrades, sparkle hugs. And most importantly, do not eat Z-bugs. Good night and Godspeed. Good night and Godspeed.